how would a coach begin to think about using neuroscience in such a way that they began to realize over several months, I've shifted the way I understand what I'm doing. When I talk to coaches and in my own supervision of coaches, what I'm very conscious of is that the coach brings to the coaching experience their own life experience as the way of making sense of what is happening to the coachee or the client. Now, that's absolutely fine. Of course, all we can bring at one level is our own life experience. And many coaches have got very high level experience in organizations and can read what's happening inside organizations very well, but it doesn't form the basis of real debate professionally. It forms the basis of individual practice, but not of the growth of knowledge. And so what would begin to be different within the experience of a coach beginning to use neuroscience is they would approach the client from the point of view of I, the coach, actually have a body of knowledge which, if I can use it in this context, will inform the client about themselves in such a way that the client can grow into an understanding of how to be in whatever situation the organization is presenting the person with. I mean, let me make a very simple analogy. If, as an individual, you go and consult a solicitor, you want that solicitor to have a framework and a body of knowledge which is within what is known about the law. And it's no good if you just go and see a solicitor who has their own idiosyncratic ideas about how things should be, and is taking a position which is their own individualistic position, which is not within the community of lawyers. The same if you go and see a doctor. You may, of course, want a second opinion from a different doctor because you're not entirely satisfied, but you are talking with people among whom there is a body of knowledge which is the reference point by which you can arrive at next stage solutions. And the difference for a coach in beginning to use neuroscience as the basis of their practice and the knowledge that's coming from the neurosciences is that the coach themselves begins to feel, I know where I am going. I can be the guide to this person, not just out of my own life experience, but because I've got a body of knowledge which informs the conversations that I have, the dialogue that I enter into. Let me talk about one specific area which is quite a bone of contention among the coaching community, which is about what is the difference between coaching and therapy. The fact of the matter is that most of the techniques that are taught in coaching programs derive originally from various forms of psychotherapy. Now, many coaches say, look, what I'm concerned about is the present and the future. What therapy is concerned about is the past. That seems to me to be such an artificial distinction, because the person who comes, the coachee, the client, is the presenting past. We have nothing but the accumulation of experience. And in my own supervision practice and in my teaching of coaches, I'm absolutely clear that unless a coach really understands something about not just the events of the person's life, but the experiences and what they meant in the person's life, the coach is going to be very badly informed about what they can expect of the person's development in the future. We now know that the brain in its early development through childhood and into late childhood and through adolescence, the brain is extraordinarily plastic and malleable, and yet it begins at the same time to become increasingly fixed. It begins to create the identity of the person, which by the time a person is 22 or 23 or 24 has created the identity of the person that the person then projects into the world. And unless you understand as a coach something about what was happening in the whole of that process, you really don't know whether the person has got the capacity to do whatever the development is and the growth is that you're hoping to induce in coaching, because unless you've got an understanding of that pattern, you may just be running blind into the future. if you as a coach had been born in China, you would be speaking fluent Chinese. So you have within you, in principle, the capacity to speak fluent Chinese, though life experience may not have introduced you to the speaking of Chinese. Indeed, if you're listening to this, you're probably fluent in English in a way that a Chinese person might not be fluent in English. Now, if you wanted your coach, if you wanted your coachee, as it were, metaphorically, to speak Chinese, it would be a perfectly unreasonable thing to want them to do if you assume just because all people could in principle speak Chinese, any particular person will be able to speak Chinese if they haven't been introduced to it. The fact of the matter is that some of the things that we hope for in our coaching clients, if they have not been introduced to the possibility of that in their own growing up processes, will not have it within them. Let's take a child who is brought up in a relatively isolated family, doesn't have much social contact, is taught that being very clever at school is very important, turns out to be bright, does well in exams, gets a good degree from a good university, becomes a lawyer, is very technically good, and then finds themselves having to be a team leader in a law firm, and absolutely has nothing in their experience which would give them the sense of what it is like to be a team leader, how to be a team leader, what the nature of relationships are. Simply doesn't know that, and yet the law firm hasn't understood that the person doesn't have that capacity. If the coach doesn't understand that the person doesn't have that capacity, they will run their heads against a metaphorical brick wall in their coaching with the client, which, if they understood that the person doesn't have that capacity, they would go down a different route to get that experience, in order to start some process which was about building the capacity rather than assuming that because everybody ought to be a leader, everybody can be a leader.